Welcome to the Rig Doctor podcast, where I'm giving out remedies to soothe your ailing tone and fix your sick pedal boards. I'm your host, Mason Marangella, aka the Rig Doctor, and I've been building rigs for over a decade for many of the industry's top professionals. And now I'm giving away all my secrets to DIYers just like you. I'm giving away all my tricks, tips, resources, and easy hacks that I've learned over the years so that you too can build a pedal board just like a pro. As a quick aside, if you want to support this podcast, you can do so by sharing it on social media, subscribing to our podcast, or following us on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube. You can also support this podcast financially by purchasing one of my products, Vertex Effects, from either our website or an authorized dealer, or becoming a supporting member through our Patreon page or on therigdr.com. We have several membership levels as low as $4.99 a month with exclusive access to private live streams and Q&As, exclusive deals and discounts on Vertex products, as well as early access to new releases. You can also get personalized one-on-one phone and Zoom conversations with me, the Rig Doctor. This can be as in-depth as troubleshooting some problems with your rig in real time to me advising you on the best way to build your next rig on your own. As always, I don't want money to be any obstacle for you that prevents you from having the best possible tone. If you look at all these options and you cannot afford any of them, please send us a request for a free account over at info@vertexeffects.com or info@therigdr.com, and we will gladly grant you full access to our standard tier of privileges, free of charge, no means testing required. We just ask that when your financial circumstances change and you are able to afford the $4.99 a month, that you become a supporting member at that time. Lastly, I want to thank our sponsor for this, Blue Microphones, Diodario, and True Tone, who are all providing products for giveaways and also giving us products to actually record the podcast. Thank you to all of them for making this possible and for supporting our YouTube channel. We supremely appreciate it, and we couldn't do it without them. And in today's episode, we're going to reinforce many of these same things that we ordinarily do in this podcast. I'm bringing on my buddy, Bob Chidlaw, who is the principal engineer and designer of all the DSP coding over at Source Audio. Of course, there are other engineers there, but he is one of the primary engineers that's doing all of the software side of things. A brilliant engineer, has worked with Kurzweil for many years, up through the early 2000s. He came along with many of the engineers over at Analog Devices and started this new company called Source Audio, and they've done great. He talks about the development of the company, how it started, some big product mishaps and failures as we all go through when we're first starting a new business, and talks about some of his favorite products that he's ever designed. And he talks about a lot of the other products that other companies have designed that he really admires. We get into things like analog drive-through and what makes vintage rack gear great. And we really get into the story of Source Audio, which I think is really cool, that makes some of my favorite effects. So without further delay, let's bring on Bob and let's talk about Source Audio, his time at Kurzweil, and everything in between. Well, Bob, welcome to the podcast. It's a real honor to have you. Anytime that I get to speak with somebody that knows anything remotely about DSP or has had sort of the longevity of career that you've had in designing products and in being part of that process, it's always a real treat for me, because I feel like it's a component, especially on the DSP side, that I know so little about, and I feel like, you know, the guys that do it are in this coveted group and they speak the same language that nobody else speaks. And so I always want to speak with those people, pick their brains, and you've been around for a long time, even before Source Audio. And so I really want to kind of talk about sort of your evolution, how effects in equipment has changed, how your approach has changed to design. And we'll just get into it. So can you kind of start about on like how you got into this and kind of maybe the first real professional gig that you had where you were designing audio equipment like this?
Well, I was working for a company called Iconics Corporation, which one might guess from the name, they did image processing. And So we were actually working on some very exciting stuff. We were doing this color printing system for 4-color printing. And we were able to put color pictures up on our monitor, which, of course, now that just sounds like, duh. Well, of course. But back then, more than 40 years ago, it wasn't really quite so obvious. And so that was actually a lot of fun. And the only reason I left the job was because I got this mailing from Ray Kurzweil, though his name wasn't on it, saying it was addressed to all subscribers of Computer Music Journal, a pretty esoteric publication. But I subscribed to everything I could find. And that was right up my alley because I was really doing digital image processing, which is surprisingly similar to digital audio processing, except it takes place in 2 dimensions instead of our 1-time dimension. So in a lot of ways, audio is easier. But anyway, I got this mailing. They were looking for people who wanted to join a new synthesizer company. And I thought, whoa, this is definitely it. I've got to do this. Because I'd already built some analog synthesizers. I had built a modular, and then I built a polyphonic. The polyphonic never really worked well because the oscillators just drifted, and you couldn't really tune them. I didn't really have software to tune them. But as a useful exercise, it was a great experience, and it's better than going to school in a lot of ways. Doing all this, figuring everything out yourself, that's when you really know you've got it, because otherwise it doesn't work. And you read something in a book and you think, yeah, I know how to do this, but in truth, until you've done it, you don't. And yes, I majored in physics in college, so really I'm just sort of self-taught in all this electrical engineering, signal processing stuff. So anyway, they hired me, and we got to work on...
What year was this?
This was late 82. And Ray had decided, probably in conversations with Stevie Wonder, because he had talked to Stevie Wonder because Ray Kurzweil had previously done the reading machine for the blind, and Stevie had one. And so they talked a bit, and Ray decided that we would do a sampling synthesizer, of which there really, the Fairlight was out there. And I think Synclavier was out there too, but they weren't really emphasizing the sampling aspect. They were more an FM machine at the time. And so it isn't what I would have done. I wouldn't have chosen a sampling synthesizer because, hey, I'd never even played one, and but that's what we did, and it came out pretty good. I learned a lot. There really wasn't much DSP inside the first synthesizer, although there was a lot of DSP behind the scenes in processing the sounds. We would go into the studio, and it took us a while to learn, you've actually got to go to a real studio. You just can't go into some odd corner of this office building and record something. Who knew that? Well, actually, a lot of people knew that, but we didn't. So we get the best recordings we can, but then there's always little problems, little faults you may not notice at the time, and you can't hardly really go back without enormous effort and time waste. So we would do things to improve the sounds, which was a lot of signal processing. And that also really improved my ear. after a while, I could say, oh yes, 300 milliseconds into this sound, the third harmonic really sticks out. And so we had tools that could go in and like bring down the level of the third harmonic, starting at like 200 milliseconds, and then maybe at 500 milliseconds the cut goes away because it was no longer needed. So a lot of tools like that to do all sorts of very, very tweaky processing.
Did you find that in that time period that, whether it was working with Kurzweil or looking at maybe what Eventide or Lexicon was doing, they obviously didn't have the processing power and the bit, these were often not as sophisticated or as high fidelity as they are now, or you could design around now. What do you think made them, like a lot of these, older Kurzweil pieces or old Lexicon pieces so valuable? Presumably it wasn't, that it was, the bit rate wasn't that great. It was like the analog that insulated it, or what do you suppose might have been why people think those sounds are so superior still?
Well, we had good people, as did companies like Lexicon and Eventide. We had good people, and we knew what sounded good, and we would believe our ears, and we were going to keep working on this until it sounded good. Of course, I can only speak for Kurzweil, but I think that's probably the general trend, that you really just can't be following orders. You will design a product that will do this and this and this and meet these specs. Okay, we've designed it, it meets the specs, here it is. And nobody, and then it's passed off to upper management. Upper management never listens because they don't know how to listen. And they just approve it. It's like, well, all right, well, we'll ship it, engineering says they're done, so we'll ship it. But engineering never said they were done. It was... I remember shortly before I think we shipped the original 250, we were just in a bit of a tizzy about the piano sound, and they were having some meeting to discuss this, and I was still back in my sound room working away, and I just knew where things were going, and I put a sign up on the closed door that said, "No, go away," because I knew they were going to be coming. And it's like, no, we're not ready. We're not ready to ship it. It's not good yet. So, necessity being the mother of invention, apologies to Frank Zappa and all, but, we only had 10-bit sounds in the 250. That was a decision, again, by Ray. We're going to go with 10 bits because 8-bit sounds like absolute crap. And so, we'll go to 10. But in fact, that turned out not to be enough. So what we had to do was to compress the amplitude of the sound. So the sound always took the full range of 10 bits. And when it was played back, it turned down the gain on a VCA. Except it was actually, it was an actual analog VCA. So that got us acceptable quality. And then it's like, well, we have to design a sampling option. Oh, but that was even harder because... So we ended up sampling to 12 bits of resolution because we happened to have 12 bits in the sample RAM, because you can't buy 10-bit wide RAM. And then we had to go through all sorts of games to compress it and decompress it, and we had pre-emphasis and de-emphasis done digitally. And it was an immense hassle, but it finally worked, It finally got to an acceptable quality. So, thing is, if you know what sounds good and you know what doesn't sound good and you believe your ears, and you just keep working, and I guess you got to be a little bit of cleverness in there to come up with some answers. you can get there. So I think that's what everyone did. You just you just work until you know it sounds good.
Do you think that there is any truth to the idea that, presumably if you're dealing with a 10-bit delay, let's say, really any delay at 10-bit is a 10-bit delay. Like, presumably if you're talking about a real tonal aspect in a digital processing piece like that in that era, it would have had to have come down to the analog side of that delay, would it not? Or what do you kind of see as maybe like the magic of when somebody says, oh, when I hear this Kurzweil, it has this particular sound that I can't get on any of these replications or these things that are trying to emulate it and maybe have much more fidelity. What do you think it is about kind of like that maybe era in particular? Because certainly now I would say when we look at most engineers, their time is spent a lot in the DSP side, a lot in the programming, a lot in the software, not as much on the analog side. And I'm saying this having spoken to a lot of the people that are designing a lot of these DSP products now. And I think back then it seemed like there was maybe equal attention paid to all the different components of things, maybe bigger teams. Do you have any opinion on kind of how that shakes out?
Well, we've got as little analog in our products as we can get away with now. Given that some people want analog dry through, it has forced us into a little more analog than I would really like. But all I can really say, if you just work at something, you can get around the limitations. That you've always got limitations, and you've just got to work on the trade-offs. What engineering sort of is just working on the trade-offs. All right, this can be a little bit better, but it's going to take a longer time to get the product done, or it's going to cost more. You've just got to, keep working. You can't be trying things at random. You've got to have some idea of what you sort of expect to work.
Yeah. What product would you say when you were working at Kurzweil was like the one you were most proud of your involvement on? Like when you finished it, you were like, wow, we really knocked it out of the park with this. Whether it was commercially successful or not, like which one did you feel like was kind of the flagship of maybe your collaboration with the team there?
Well, the K2000, it was our first essentially all digital synth. It was, digital down to the final, this is true now. The final, D to A converter, and then there's an analog filter after that. I think there must have been an analog brick wall filter after that. Although, frankly, my mind is a little fuzzy on the details here. But the K2000, it fetched the samples and it interpolated them to whatever sample playback rate you needed to get the pitch you wanted, and then it applied digital filters, a wide variety of digital filters, and some digital distortion. Some digital oscillators. Oscillators didn't really sound good at higher frequencies because they were sort of aliased a bit, but it was all done digitally, and I think that could have been. I think I might say the first mass market product that really had good sounding, resonant low pass filters in it, and that just took me years of work. Although it seems like, well, gosh, isn't it obvious? But no, it really wasn't. It wasn't obvious at all how to do some of these things, and to do them in a very minimum cost approach. Like for instance, it's pretty straightforward to calculate now, and we do this in many of our products, the EQ2, for instance, we calculate the filter coefficients with every new sample that goes by. So 48,000 times a second, we recalculate the filter coefficients. So if you're trying to move them, they're moving smoothly. They're not moving in steps. They're moving smoothly. Most people who run things like that on PCs, the PC, in some sense, has a processor that can outrun our DSP chips by a wide margin. But it only sort of can do that if it can process a whole bunch of samples at once. And a lot of people just don't update the control any faster than the block rate that it's processing. But we update it every sample. And it's a lot of work to calculate those coefficients. Back in the days of the Kurzweil 2000, we didn't have that kind of processing power. All the high-speed processing power was strictly devoted to processing the audio samples, not to calculating coefficients. The CPU did some stuff, but it wasn't really done at the high rate.
What would you say is like the arc or the timeline for developing a product now versus, in the 1980s, if you're developing some sort of digital processing effect of some kind? Would you say that it's expedited now, that it's simpler to do, that you can have a more abbreviated team, or what do you kind of look at as sort of like the manufacturing arc of conception of a product to completion? How would you maybe compare and contrast what those look like?
Well, it doesn't really feel all that much faster, but I will say we're doing more complicated things. And we do have a very small team of engineers at Source Audio. We had, I think the peak at Kurzweil, there must have been like 50 engineers. Obviously that covers everything from mechanical to electrical engineering, just dealing with the hardware aspects, getting all the processors to run. And so we've got a much smaller team. But if we were doing something as big as a keyboard synthesizer, I think we would need much more of a mechanical engineering team to do that kind of stuff. And yeah, for Kurzweil we did custom DSP chips, and that was at the time when it made sense. Not only when it made sense, it was really a really good idea, because the off-the-shelf stuff wasn't fast enough. So we did our own stuff, and that was really exciting to architect the chips. I didn't do the chip design, I did the architecture of it. And now it's just off-the-shelf stuff, so we don't have to write compilers for these chips that we're using. That comes with the chip. On the other hand, we could tailor the compilers to do whatever we needed, and it's really a lot of fun to code where you've specified the DSP hardware and the compiler language that you're using to program it. When you've done all that, you have no one to blame but yourself. When it's come time to write the code, it's like, oh gosh, I can't actually do this, can I? Well, I should have seen that one coming. Yeah, so the last chip that I specified, which I never got to code myself, it had all sorts of obscure-looking instructions that probably no one has really figured out. Why is that there? Why do we need the coefficient of 1/3 as something we can just grab immediately without having to go through gyrations to get it? Well, it turns out there's a really efficient logarithm approximation that uses the number 1/3. And so that's why 1/3 was in there, if we want to take a logarithm or an exponential inside the chip. I'm not sure anyone realized what that was for, because I haven't seen a discussion of this little improved logarithm approximation thing. So there's a lot of very, very specific things. And now we just have to take what we get. But I can deal with that.
Right. So now, what's the DSP chip that most of your stuff is based around? Is it a Shark, or what are you guys typically using on the Source Audio products?
We're using these Analog Devices parts, and they're not as sophisticated as a Shark, but they are.
So these are like FV1s, or
No, they're bigger, better than that, much better than that. They're somewhere in between. They were their sort of cheap line of DSP chips. They had converters on the chip, Sigma Delta converters. So obviously, if you can put the converters on the same chip that does the DSP, then you don't really need anything else, pretty much, Audio goes into the chip, audio comes out of the chip, power supply goes into the chip, and some sort of controls have to go in. But you don't really need very many parts.
right? I mean, I guess it's similar in the FV1. I guess that I should have known better, because that's Spin Semiconductors that makes the FV1, not Analog Devices. But it's similar in that fashion, in that you have a certain fixed number of controls that you can manipulate off the board, and you audio comes in, audio comes out in that regard. Although it's more sophisticated than a Spin chip.
Yeah, we can do a lot more instructions, and now what we have on all the products is there's another little microprocessor that actually runs all the front panel controls, or top panel controls is what we call it in the effects business. The top panel controls. It looks at the controls and writes things into the DSP to control what it's doing. And I've been pushing more work off on the microprocessor as the microprocessors have gotten more powerful, and I'm always looking for ways to save instructions inside the actual DSP chip. So for something as simple as a one-pole low-pass filter, it's a very common structure. I used to just I think the first products, I would just get a number from 0 to 1, controlling, say, a knob that's labeled frequency. And then I would figure out, what does that really mean in terms of my low-pass coefficient? I would look things up in a table, and I would do some various mappings. And now I ask the external microprocessor to do all that lookup and just give me the coefficient. And then I smooth it from time to. It can't update at the sample clock rate, so I have to smooth that transition. But that turns out to be really pretty benign, and you can't really hear it. That it's really only changing discretely, because with every sample that comes in, I'm moving a little bit towards the new value, knowing that I'll get there about the time it writes another one. And so we've got a lot of instructions, and it's on the bigger chips. I think I can mention it. There's like 3,584 instructions. You notice I know that number exactly. Yes, the last thing we shipped, the Ultrawave, I think I was down to 0.1% wasted instructions. It was over 99.8 or 99.9% of all the instructions were used. So that's how tightly packed it was. And of course, if I had a few more instructions, I could have fit more stuff in, and I would have, except of course it does slow things down to getting a shippable product.
There's those engineering trade-offs you mentioned.
Yes, at a certain point you have to shoot the engineer and ship the product. I mean, that's not a saying of engineers, that's a saying from the management. But it is in fact true. You have to call it quits at some point.
Right. Yeah, well, I can't imagine, my skills kind of don't extend much beyond the analog domain. So Even an FV1 to me is a little bit of a foreign land, even though it's sort of in some ways like the almost unscrew upable in terms of, once you're getting signal in and out of it, you have so many kind of pre-written fixed parameters, there's not so much to it. But even so, I'm always in awe of people that can do the things that you guys are doing. And I want to kind of go back a little bit and kind of talk about how you transitioned to Source Audio. How did you come to find each other? What is that story like? Because certainly it's been a really fruitful relationship. Your work with Source Audio, you guys have been releasing some of my favorite delays and reverbs out there, and just really innovative products. So certainly you were a real catch. I'm curious to know how that all came about.
Oh, yes. Well, yes. So the original Kurzweil Music Systems went bankrupt in 1990. Ray Kurzweil was quite a visionary and quite an optimist. And you have to be an optimist to start a company. But there has to be a limit to your optimism. There has to be a sense of reality. And sadly, there wasn't much sense of reality, so we went under. And then we got bought out by the Korean acoustic piano manufacturer, Young Chang. And we were, we were sort of excited. Well, we might have some low-cost, East Asian manufacturing, and but it was difficult. I thought we could. I certainly agree that on making money. I've never opposed making money. I wanted our products to sell, and yet that seemingly wasn't really their goal. Of course, what really goes on in upper management, in Korea. Well, I certainly have no idea what was really going on. There was one really nice product we had. We were making it in the United States, and then they took the production back to Korea, and the quality went down and the price went up. But then they staffed their electrical production facility from all the people, from all the piano production people. And so I imagine, I'm just guessing, but everyone was told, oh yes, you must send 2 people to work in the new electronics division. Who are they going to send? Though they're going to send the 2 worst people, aren't they? So, in fact, it was just as frustrating. And then, so they finally went under. Or at least they had a monstrous collapse, and they laid off most of the engineering staff. And then they eventually got bought out by Samick, another Korean musical instrument company, and then finally the Korean courts ruled that Samick couldn't really hold on to it. That was antitrust, and then they sold it to a division of Hyundai, not the car people, but the apartment building people, the apartment building construction people. There's a fit. Yeah, we can start making home pianos. Of course, I was out of the company at that point. But anyway, so I was let go after 19 years. It seemed a shame, but I was contemplating retiring. I didn't really seem to have the heart to do anything. But then the best way to get a job, is a personal contact. And so someone calls me up and says, yeah, I'm looking for some people to act as consultants on this company that I'm consulting to, and you just want to get some people from the industry in to talk about some things. I figured you'd be a good person. Yeah, okay. And so one of the guys who was also consulting there was Bob Adams from Analog Devices, and we knew each other. We had talked. We had met each other at various Audio Engineering Society events, and I believe he had come over a couple of times because we were using some of their sample rate converter chips in our products. You know, he asked me what I was doing, and I said, really nothing. He said, well, why don't you consult for Analog Devices? We need DSP people. Yeah, and Analog Devices, you know, it may seem a strange name to really build digital parts, but they dealt with it. They refused to change their name. I remember back in the early 70s, a friend of mine was working for General Radio, which was a really big deal here in Massachusetts. They did a lot of signal test signal equipment. And the story I'm told was the wife of the CEO, you know, got tired of telling people, oh, yes, my husband works for General Radio. Oh, how nice, you build radios. No, they don't build radios. They build test equipment. and they changed their name to GR. All right, so back to my history here. So, you know, he says we need people in Analog Devices. So I did some consulting there. I was a little surprised to find I can still learn totally new things. And I did a cell phone echo canceller for them, which, you know, it might look like sort of distant, but, you know, really, it's all this audio processing. It's the same sorts of things. You've got filters and, you know, and compressors and it's all sort of the same thing. And so I was able to do that, and then I wrote a few more things for them. I wrote a subharmonic enhancer. It's like if you're trying to get low notes out of a speaker that doesn't really have that kind of low end. Well, if you actually generate some harmonics, second, third, and fourth harmonics, and that the speaker might be able to reproduce, if you hear second, third, and fourth harmonics all together, your ear fills in the low harmonic. So I did that one for them. So so things are going good there, and then Roger Smith, our CEO, he was getting sort of tired of dealing with analog. He was running their, I'll call it a division. I don't know if it was really a division, whatever, the group. He decided he and this other engineer, Jesse Revignani, would leave and start a pedal company, a guitar pedal company. And I guess they got permission to take me with them. And so the three of us and Roger's friend Hunter Ball, whose expert was in finance, and thus Roger and Hunter put up the money, and Jesse and I did the engineering. And that was the start of Source Audio. And the idea was
what year was this?
That was 2004, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, and I'd been laid off from Kurzweil in 2002. Yeah, so their idea, the first idea we had, which I liked, it wasn't mine, but I really liked it, was these accelerometers that were starting to really appear and could be had really cheaply. And Analog Devices made some of them. So was an accelerometer controller that you could wear on your hand. And so you could change the sound just by waving your hand around. And I thought that sounded like a really great idea. And obviously everyone did, inside of Source Audio. Regretfully, the marketplace didn't really agree. But we came up with a product, and then the original product you had to have another wire connected to this thing on your hand, and we knew that wasn't really a great thing, and so we came up with a wireless version. But damn it, people just weren't taken with it.
What was the name of that first product?
Well, it was the SA101, and the name of it was, the product, the accelerometer was called the Hot Hands. So as the official name, I'm not sure, but we had it running a collection of filters. What eventually, it eventually, there's a direct path of development from that to the C4 synthesizer. So we had like low passes and band passes and high passes and triple band passes that could do vocal sounding stuff.
I got it right here.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
There it is.
$60. The original price. Ooh, I'm not sure what the original price might have been, but it might have been $2.99 if it wasn't $3.99.
Well, I mean, this is just the first one that I could find that came up. I don't know how much they are, ordinarily, but
that's a fair price for what you get. I'm saying that is a good price.
Right.
Anyway, yeah. So you could control all these things, and it actually had a very good model of the crybaby wah response in there, and I actually still have that on my pedal board with an expression pedal plugged in, and I use it for my wah, and it's so I'm still using it in a sense. Somewhere on the net, there's a video of me controlling a modular synthesizer with a pair of hot hands, one on each hand, controlling various parameters.
And Bob, are you a guitar player or a bass player or a keyboard player, or what do you play?
Well, I'll admit, when I was a mere tyke, I wanted to be a guitar player because all the cowboys played guitar, the singing cowboys. Possibly you are not old enough to catch the reference. And so my mother goes to this music store in Los Angeles in the 50s, and they say, "Oh, he's too young," because I was in like third grade, or possibly second grade. He's really too young to play the guitar. He should play the accordion. This was the heyday of Lawrence Welk. And I actually am grateful to that store for getting me to play keyboards at the young age. The accordion keyboard is actually just a little smaller than the standard piano keyboard. Of course, I did have to learn all those bass notes with the buttons. But I did pretty good. And then we moved. And I never started.
But you couldn't be Gene Autry.
No, I couldn't be. And then I just put it aside. It just, although I made fast progress, but I wasn't really listening to music. I didn't have a record player. I would listen to music when we were driving in the family car, and my father would turn the radio on. And although I did hear Purple People Eater by Sheb Wooley, a rockabilly style tune, along the lines of other great rockabilly sci-fi classics like Flying Saucers, Rock and Roll, and other stuff. But I didn't really get into music until I think maybe 7th grade, where I had a teacher in music class who really turned me on to classical music, and I really started listening to classical music. And then I wanted to play the piano. And so, you know, they got me an old upright, and I started taking lessons, and and I did really well. And then we moved to Paris, and actually I found another teacher there, and he was even better because he actually had me playing real music by real people, you know, Chopin and Beethoven, Mozart, as opposed to little pieces, you know, watered down for, you know, your young piano students. So he had me playing real pieces, and that was great. I was very, very into that stuff.
Sounds like you moved around a lot. Were your parents in the military?
Oh yeah, my father's in the Army, so we just moved constantly. It's an interesting experience. I wouldn't have lost it for the world. But very different. I'm just so non-localized, as we say in quantum mechanics. I could play Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata, although the last movement wasn't really up to speed. I couldn't quite handle Chopin's Polonaise in A flat. That was a little beyond me. But then also by 11th, this was like, ninth grade? Yeah, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade. Yeah, by then in 11th grade, I was starting to get into pop music. I remember being over at a friend's house, and he played me some Bob Dylan and some Leadbelly. This is like 1966. Thank you, Gary. Thank you. And then we moved back to the States, and I got to actually listen to AM radio. And here we get the shout out to KJR Seattle. Yeah. It was so good. It was such a great AM station. They played everything. Soul music, rock music, all sorts of stuff, you know. And I really got into it, you know. The Seeds, Pushing Too Hard. Oh, iconic. I didn't realize what that would lead to eventually. Proto-punk. But hey, I was willing to like a lot of stuff, the Mamas and the Papas. They were great. Nancy Sinatra, Jackson, woo, Stevie Wonder. I was made to love her. All this great stuff. It was all just jumbled together. So I started
sounds like you played multiple instruments.
Yeah, so then I started fooling around on guitar. Never really took guitar lessons. Eventually got myself an electric guitar my sophomore year in college, a Mosrite, which I'm sad to say I sold. I sold it before Mosrites became hip. I sold it and I got a Gibson SG because Jerry played one at the time. So I got better on guitar, and then at some point I bought a $25 bass, a harmony bass. Also got rid of that one. That was all right. I didn't need that. And then at some point I started playing mandolin, and I got my grandpa's fiddle, and I got that fixed up and tried that. And then I started taking voice lessons. And all my friends were very thankful for that, because despite my instrument skills, man, singing just didn't come naturally to me. So I found this teacher. Actually, a friend of mine found him, and he really specializes in teaching people how to sing, people who have no idea. He has taught people, he's told me, people who had no idea that there could be a match between what you were singing and what the band was playing, that they were the same notes. And these people, they didn't get it. you wonder, is it possible? But yes, it's possible. They could really be into music and all this, but they've never had any sort of formal instruction. I've had tons of formal instruction, which I really took to because I just had this engineering bent. Oh, you want to teach me something? I'm ready to learn it. So anyway, so now I can sing too.
So maybe we'll see some vocal processing effects from Source Audio here.
I have my hopes. I can't say anything more at this point, but there is a product which I'm hoping we might get to someday.
So tell me, Bob, what do you think was the first product at Source Audio that kind of cemented Source Audio as kind of one of the contenders amongst pedal companies that are making, like really, really, sophisticated, digital delays, digital reverbs, etc. What do you think was kind of like the Source Audio's first hit, would you say?
Well, this is something that they don't teach in engineering school. Of course, I didn't go to engineering school. I have a physics degree. But if I had gone to engineering school, they wouldn't have taught it either. I know that because all the people I work with have pretty much gone to engineering school. The shape of that first product that you had up there, that shape, that sort of weirdish shape, we paid a lot of money for that shape. A design consultant did that for us, and it cost a lot of money. It reminds me of the Kurzweil, the original Kurzweil 250 front panel, which also came out of a design consultant. And but they didn't know anything about synthesizers. They thought they were big on human factors, but they didn't know synthesizers. And so the entire time we came up with stuff on the 250, we were constantly fighting the front panel and finding ways to make those buttons do more things. And there were various modes you could get into, and someone who really learned the front panel could just fly over the thing. But it really didn't fit the product at all because we had so much more you could do than these handful of buttons. So anyway, so then our next product, we had a different shape. It was much smaller. We had come to realize, big pedals, it's a problem for people putting a lot of them on the pedal board. And now we find the problem that I think both Jesse and myself, although we were amateur guitarists, we weren't really gigging musicians. And we really didn't have the problem of carting pedal boards around and realizing, damn, this thing is heavy. So these pedals they're still sort of big, and they're still funny shaped because we wanted to preserve some of the original shape of that first pedal. And a lot of people found them really ugly. Oh, and then I missed the smaller plastic pedals. Yeah, okay. Well, there's a line of plastic pedals before the smaller metal pedals, and it turns out, even though it was good plastic, it might not take a Marshall stack falling on it, but you could stomp on it, unless maybe you're Leslie West in his prime. But no, people didn't like it, and they also sort of thought they were ugly. And okay, yeah, I have to agree, they were maybe ugly. So we went through all these various levels of ugliness, and then we hit upon the brilliant idea: let's make a rectangular box like 99% of all the other people do. And that was the key. That was the key. It had nothing to do with engineering. It was just this little marketing issue that a rectangular metal box is actually pretty classy looking. And
so was there one particular product that was tied to, or was just kind of reinterpreting the existing devices and then kind of translating them into a rectangular box?
Well, we would always add features. We were always trying to make things more sophisticated. And so that was the what was that, Jeff? The original I can't even remember now the name of these things.
Vertigo?
Yeah, the Vertigo was in that box. Was that the first one?
Yeah, the 1 series box.
I remember the Vertigo. I remember the L.A. Lady. I don't know if that was later.
That
but they
was.
seemed to.
It was all about the same time period. We
Yeah.
came out with these over some period of time, and it's like, so all right, finally people would take us seriously and really actually listen to the pedals. Now, admittedly, there's still a lot of people who refuse to listen to digital pedals. They, oh, it can't be any good, it's digital. But people who are willing to listen will have to admit that, yeah, it's pretty good, you know. So that was the big key, rectangular pedals.
It's just as simple as that.
It's as simple as that. Well, of course, they've got to sound good. I mean, you know, if it sounds like crap, well.
No, they sound. I mean, my favorite pedal of yours is the Collider, and I've been preaching that from the mountaintops, because a lot of people in the kind of on the pedal board side of things, one of the newest, latest, and greatest sort of resurgence of old styles of routing your pedal board systems is the wet, dry, wet fad, where people would use a line out of their kind of primary dry amplifier, and then they would feed that line level output to their processing effects. In stereo, they would feed a stereo power amp, and then they would have, you know, these cabinets that would be receiving the 100% wet effect return only. And the challenge is that most of the pedals that have multi effects, they don't have the ability to invoke any sort of parallel mixer, so they're forced to have to put all these devices in some sort of parallel mixer that also gives them the ability to be able to mute the inputs of those devices. And typically it's reserved for delay and reverb, whereas the Source Audio Collider, you are able to put those devices in parallel, the reverb and delay. You can put them 100% wet or kill dry, and it has that analog dry through, so you don't have the latency challenge that's sometimes associated with doing this sort of thing. And so I love it for that reason, because it's like an all-in-one box solution, and you know, you can create that sound very easily, and you don't need to involve the parallel mixer and sort of all these other things that just add space and complication to the pedal board. And so for that reason, I love that device. It's so simple to create or to produce that result, and still have really great reverbs and really great delays. It's really not a compromise in my mind.
Yeah, no, that's something, you know, I wasn't pushing for, you know. It struck me as odd when I first considered it. Gosh, why would you want to do that? But you know, certainly a lot of people do. And like when we went to stereo, I was like, well, all right, I guess we can do this, but it just seems silly to me. Although once I started actually playing stuff through our stereo effects, I was like, ooh, this is nice. You know, in my basement room, it's nice. I mean, on stage, I know that's going to be a little more problematic. But yeah, I see it. It is really nice. You know, it's more like you know, listening to a record. Thus dating myself by talking about listening to records. Listening to a real studio production in stereo, it's like, you know, and you can hear the guitar, and although the guitar maybe is more in one channel than the other, there still is a stereo sense to the whole thing. And that is nice. And yeah, so I have to admit that.
Earlier on in our conversation, you had mentioned that there was this impetus for the market to dictate the analog dry through as sort of a prerequisite, and you had some sort of reservations, or at least I interpreted it as possible reservations, and it's certainly a commentary that I see is really ubiquitous amongst, people on forums and in any sort of maybe commentary on any particular devices where they'll say, well, it doesn't have analog drive-through. I guess I can never use it on my pedal board. It's destroyed. What's sort of your sense of sort of the value of the analog drive-through, and maybe where do you feel like maybe some people maybe misunderstand what the trade-off is, or maybe why somebody like an Eventide or a Line 6 may not use an analog drive-through? Can you explain kind of the trade-offs and maybe where it's sort of a wash one way or the other, or where you might, what's the benefits and drawbacks, or the engineering compromises, as you put it?
Well, yeah. So if you don't have analog drive-through, and you are converting the signal to digital, the original analog input to digital, and then converting it right back to analog and sending it out. So you're going through another stage of conversion. And the converters are pretty good these days. Not perfect, of course. You have to really pay an awful lot of attention. I mean, even though you can buy yourself a converter and the specs are really good in the spec book, that doesn't really mean you can put it on the circuit board and have it really run there and produce really high quality output, the highest quality output that converter chip is capable of. And there's a certain art to doing that, and how you lay out stuff on the circuit boards. I remember back in the Kurzweil days, at one point we were getting all this nasty digital grunge on our output, and it took forever to find out what it was, and finally someone realized, yeah, the digital line to this D to A converter, it runs all the way underneath this chip, right down sort of the center of it, before it gets to the pin that it's going to. So this digital line was running right underneath the chip the whole length, and the chip, of course, is sitting on the board, and it's really sort of right next to this wire. And that wire just leaked so much harsh stuff over that even though the converter itself could do much better, running this digital wire right next to it was terrible. It produced ghastly sounds. So it's not straightforward on how you hook the things up. You have to know what you're doing. It's not really enough just to sort of follow the example circuit. When you see a schematic, it talks about, okay, there's a resistor here and there's a capacitor here. You connect them up. It doesn't really say actually where they are. It just says it has to be connected. It doesn't say how it's laid out spatially on the circuit board, what things are close to each other and what isn't.
This can be particularly problematic with really high impedance stuff, like when you're dealing with transistors and things like that.
Yeah, high impedance is a real nightmare.
That's the world I live in, the high impedance world.
The Hammond organ had an impedance of like about an ohm or so. Internally, it was monstrously low impedance. So you couldn't ever measure voltages. It was all current operated. Anyway, there's a lot of art in the electrical engineering hardware part of this, of laying this stuff out and getting it to sound good. And you're probably going to need some test equipment to really figure out, is it really working well? And you've got to, again, trust your ears. So you don't want to really put any extra conversions in there. Many things are not really going to be up to it. I think our stuff is really good, but I have to admit, it's not perfect, And if you've got an awful lot of pedals, and some people certainly do, and we're grateful to them. Thank you for buying all these pedals. But if at a certain point enough pedals stacked up in series, you're going to start to notice it. And even
but that would be anybody's pedals, not just yours.
Yeah. I mean, I think ours are good, but other people are good too. and some of them undoubtedly aren't so good. And so people want to avoid that. And, and it's like, yeah, okay, our stuff is really good, but still, what are they going to do? They have to buy one of our pedals and try it out on the circuit board and then do these careful listening tests. Well, that's maybe asking too much. They really just wanted to get up there and play pentatonic scales. But to ask them to do all this stuff, it's like, that's not what they want to do. They want to just have a system and they want it to sound good, and then they can just play music. They don't want to do all this other stuff.
Well, that's where buffers come into play. Having high quality buffers, that'll help you.
But even a buffer adds noise.
Well, I mean, if it's well built, it should be negligible in terms of the noise floor. If you're talking about adding BJT buffers and stuff like that, there's some inherent attenuation of the output that happens and more of a noise floor. And I think a lot of people don't realize that an ordinary Boss pedal, it's got a JFET input and a BJT output at a minimum. Some of them even have more buffers than that in series, and you put a couple of Boss pedals in your signal path, you could have as many as 8 buffers between 3 pedals, and that can be a real problem. Some of the op amp stuff is way better, and especially if you use them in the right places. At least in my opinion, I always say make sure the guitar is loaded the way that you expect it to be on your amplifier. So 1 meg on the input, as low output impedance as possible, as close to 0, but reasonably maybe 100 to 150 ohms on the output impedance of the input buffer. And then another one at the end, because you never know the quality of the line driving of the effects that are in between the guitar and the amplifier. So having one at the end is sort of ensuring, if you have one in first and one last, you kind of have this impedance firewall, so to speak, where the pedals can be doing this impedance leapfrog all over the place depending on what combination is on. And you'll always know that you have the guitar loaded properly to what it would expect if it were plugged into an ordinary tube amp, 1 meg ordinarily. And then you got the low output impedance, again, I don't think 1K is particularly great, but a lot of pedals are. I would say, the lower the better. But I think what your stuff's maybe around 500 ohms or something like that for the most of the Source Audio stuff, or like the collider.
I leave that up to Jesse.
Hey, you let the analog guy do that side.
Well, he does everything except write the DSP code. He does the digital design to get all those parts working on the board, and also the analog design. He's come up to speed on analog. He was a little, he really hadn't done much, but, nothing quite like having your job, having your continued employment depend on sales, which depends on good sounds. Nothing quite like that to really focus your attention on learning stuff.
Yeah, that'll get a fire started. Bob, getting back to the analog drive-through, do you think that that's a necessity for all pedals, or do you think that the consumer is maybe misunderstanding the value of that sort of kind of buzzword in the industry?
I think a premium pedal is expected to do that now. Something that's really on the cheaper side. It's like, well, yeah, maybe that's not really necessary, but I think you have to be prepared for it, because I think there are people who want that. But
even an Eventide or a Line 6 doesn't have analog drive.
Well, again, it's a matter of style, and maybe we're just trying to be more responsive to what we're actually hearing from people. And certainly we're not hearing it from everyone, but the people who are saying it are being vocal enough. Do
you think that there's a detectable difference sonically when you hear a pedal that, say, is a DSP bypass versus analog drive-through or something like that?
I haven't, really done the experiment.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because most of the people that say it, I just tell them, well, put it in a parallel mixer, just so you can have the dry. and see if you really notice it. I think it'd be pretty indetectable, but I think I just think I prefer analog drive-through, but I think that, in a serial pedal board with all the other stuff that's going on, it's probably negligible, but we all have our sticking points, just like true bypass and all these other things that we're all, or at least offer the option for. Maybe we have a buffered out bypass option as well, but we're trying to accommodate people where they are at this point in time.
Yeah. You got to listen to what the customer says.
Yeah. I have one more question for you,
All
Bob,
right.
and then I will let you resume your day designing amazing pedals at Source Audio. This is a two-part question. I want to know the product, because I asked you this about Kurzweil. I want to know the product that you're most proud of that you've designed for Source Audio, and then I want to know what are other people that are doing your job, presumably with other brands, that you look at those products and it has impressed you with the engineering prowess that went into this particular guitar pedal. So part one is pedal that you're most proud of that you've designed for Source Audio, and then what's a design that's impressed you from another manufacturer.
Okay, well, I'd have to say the C4 has been that was the funnest one, because I'd played guitar synths. We had a very early Roland system at Kurzweil, the one with the really funny shaped guitar. It was just very slow, and we had a prototype Gibson, an optical pickup on it, and that really sucked. I have a Yamaha ultrasonic guitar that sends ultrasonic waves down each string and times how long it takes for the signal to come from the bridge and hit a fret where the guitar is fretted and bounce back. That time of flight tells you how much string there is, and you can figure out what fret you're on. And that thing just really didn't work well at all. The idea seems very plausible, but it really didn't work. I remember hearing a Roland synth demoed at a NAMM show a long time ago, and that sounded pretty scary good, especially since the demonstrator was one of the Japanese engineers who had worked on the pedal, and that was really scary. Have they figured out that they need people who actually can use these things to design them, as opposed to, we've just hired an engineer so he can do the engineering work. But that one, again, still hasn't really caught on with people. But the C4, I'm really happy with. It seemed like just a very, very difficult problem, and but we sort of got to it. We're like, well, can we put can we do an octave down on what was going to be our latest version of the filter pedal, the ultimate descendant of the SA101, the hot hand wah pedal. It's like, well, that would be a nice thing to add, so let me just try to work on that. Yeah, and I got it going, and then it's like, whoa, gosh, if we can do octave down, then we can actually just we can figure out what the pitch is, and then we can really just turn it into a synthesizer. And so, and it did turn into a synthesizer. And
It's a great pedal. It's a great pedal. I put it on a bunch of bass rig. Every bass player who plays it is in love with it.
Yeah, so the whole tracking issue, that was again, that was just such a pain to really get going. It's like I would get something that I thought was pretty good, and then Nathan Navarro would come up with another bass. So here's a bass. This one is tuned even lower. Oh, and the tracking is not good at the end. All right, let me figure that one out. Then, all right, now here's a bass. This is the low note is an F sharp. It's almost an octave below a standard bass. All right, well, we got that one figured out too now. So yeah, I just responsive. I find it, there is something of a delay, but there's really not much, and it feels responsive.
No, it's in anything on that is indetectable. I think it's a really great device. I mean, I think it's great for anything, but I find that now it's starting to kind of make its way into kind of the canonized pedals that bass players might choose over an OC2, OC3, OC5. Which was formerly kind of every bass player had to have some variety of that brown Boss pedal, and I see that this is for a lot of people that I work with, they're replacing it because they just find the versatility. And then of course if you link it with the I can't remember the name of the device, the hub of some kind, maybe you can correct me on the language of the product. But just that, and then allowing you to make changes through MIDI and stuff like that is also really valuable.
Yeah, that you can change all these pedals simultaneously. You can move a new sound on the C4 plus a new sound on the various other, delay and reverb and that's a very powerful thing. It does require a certain level of sophistication.
But even on its face, if you didn't want to do that at all, it's four knobs and the truth,
Yeah. So I was pleased that was a scary amount of work. We certainly didn't start off, let's do a synth pedal, because I probably would have said, guys, I can't really guarantee that I can really do a pitch tracker that's going to really work.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's my favorite one so far.
And then which pedal or a model from another brand has really impressed you, let's say lately, maybe the last few years?
Well, I do remember a few years ago, a friend of mine brought over I can't even remember quite what it was. I think it was some sort of Digitech vocal harmonizer thing. And I got to try that out. And it's like, oh, that was nice. Yeah, it really was doing pitch tracking of the vocals. Now, my pitch tracker only works for guitars. Well, guitars, basses, and we've actually had violins and steels work on it. Steel guitar. But that's all strings, But voice, I think, would require a different algorithm, and I'm not quite sure how you get that happening. That's that looks scary to me.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot of those Digitech engineers are all Lexicon guys, because they had absorbed Lexicon, and then Samsung absorbed Harman, which owned Digitech, and I don't think Digitech's making new stuff anymore. My understanding. Yeah,
there've been a lot of stuff shaking out.
What do you think's going to happen to all those guys? Like, all those guys at Lexicon that designed, the PCM stuff. The guys that designed the old like TC Electronic 2290s. Some of them may not even be alive anymore, but those companies have gone through so many different ship changes and corporate buyouts. Like, I wonder, where are those guys now? Are they still making stuff? Or are they, doing repairs for old PCM units that nobody else can do because they don't know, the inner workings of the coding? Or do you have any sense of what happens to those guys, or do you know any of those guys?
No, I really haven't been going to AES shows or NAMM shows for quite some time now. It's just gotten to seem too much work for me. So yeah, I really have lost track of everyone. So I don't know really what they're doing. Clearly, it'd be a shame if they just retired.
they've brought some pretty amazing stuff to the table, but I think you don't really know much about them because they're kind of behind the shroud of whatever kind of the corporation was that released the product. And so maybe they're the unsung heroes of these sort of the Mount Rushmore of rack effect products that have come out, but nobody really knows who the George Washington is, so to speak.
Of course, the big name in Lexicon was Dave Griesinger, who did their reverbs, and he was just brilliant. To do all that stuff in those very early days, just tinkering it all together, was pretty amazing. And the fact they sounded so good. Again, he obviously knows what's good, and knows to keep on until it works, until he really gets that sound he's heard. He's very into concert hall and concert hall acoustics.
Well, it seems like there's a concentration of sort of iconic brands and engineering that happens in Massachusetts.
Yeah,
something in the water.
Yeah, there's a lot of schools here. That's really the big industry is colleges. We got MIT and Harvard and BU, Tufts. A lot of Boston College. There must be like 50,000 students between all those. Northeastern, between all those schools. So there's a ready supply of engineers. I remember we would occasionally try to hire people at Kurzweil, hire people off the West Coast, people who had been to like UCal Berkeley or Stanford or any of those schools out there, and
that's where I went to Berkeley, the West Coast Berkeley.
A great school, but we never managed to really get anyone to move off the West Coast to the East Coast. We had some people come out of Canada, from Simon Fraser University, and they were both good, but neither of them ultimately really wanted to stay here in Massachusetts. So eventually we just gave up trying to pry people loose from the West Coast.
Maybe it's the tenacity of enduring that winter that makes them better engineers.
On the other hand, talking about engineering while I'm just rambling on here, I'm responsible for getting a few people into engineering, this whole signal engineering stuff, and really launching their careers. As Bill Gardner was a MIT graduate, and we hired him to do software, and he was an electrical engineering graduate. And he saw some of the DSP stuff that we were working on, and he was so intrigued by that, he went back to MIT and got a PhD at the MIT Media Lab, specializing in DSP, and started his own consulting company. And people from the soundware, what we call the soundware department, who worked on processing the sounds. Some of them launched companies, having seen all this stuff and seen what can be done, and they started their own companies doing this. And another guy, I think he had a sort of a media arts degree from University of Massachusetts. Oh gosh, I forgot them in my list of my list of colleges here in Massachusetts. Sorry, UMass guys. Sorry. Anyway, no particular background, but he was so intrigued by this polynomial sine approximation that I posted. I would write up all these things. Many of them were far too technical for people to understand, but I would just write them up just to get an idea. And he was so intrigued by the idea that that this polynomial would actually look like a sine wave for a while. He was so intrigued, he got permission to spend some more time trying to find some more approximations. And so I didn't really teach him. I just sort of gave him a nudge. And then his supervisor said, all right, you can work on some of this stuff. And then he really just picked up all this DSP stuff just because he thought it was so neat. And so I've seen all these people just, just sort of random. Like this one guy, I think he majored in soft drug abuse at UMass. And but once he got to see what you can really do with this software, wow, he was really into it. Yeah, no, a lot of people just got really into seeing what great things can be done with this technology, and they just really started learning and figuring stuff out for themselves. And so a lot of careers have come out of there.
Well, I think certainly, you're undoubtedly incredibly passionate about this, and I think that certainly informs how other people feel, when they see somebody that's really overwhelmed and fully immersed in a certain thing, that can sometimes have a lot of influence. So, you're you've launched some careers, it sounds like, through your passion and love of engineering and in particular in the audio field, it sounds like.
Yeah, pretty much everyone. I mean, I was after a little while, I got to really participate in all the hiring of the engineers. So I pretty much had to approve the people. Although we had them talk to a lot of people, and generally pretty much everyone had to be positive about them. But I think we managed to find people who were really passionately involved and really wanted to do a really great job. And, no one was willing to settle for just a half-assed sort of job. They really wanted to do a good job. And I think we got that whole attitude throughout engineering, that we're doing a really great job here.
Yeah. Well, certainly you guys are, as if it's not clear from my praise throughout the podcast, I think that you guys are making amazing stuff, and I certainly think people should be checking out the Source Audio products, and I think you guys seem to have covered sort of all of the major food groups now in terms of types of effects and genres of effects. And I literally have a collider, I think, on every one of my pedal boards for the explicit reason that I told you, even though maybe that wasn't an intended application to use it as this sort of wet, dry, wet, sort of simplifying all in one box. But even without that particular feature, I still think it's an incredibly great sounding, like everything all in one, and certainly to get something that would be equal in size of two disaggregated products, it would nowhere match what the firepower of this thing and the sounds also. So it's quite a feat, and I'm appreciative of the work that you're doing at Source Audio, the products that you guys are making, and I think that anybody who hasn't checked out one of the products is certainly at a loss, and they don't. They're not maximizing maybe some of the products that they could have on their board. So highly recommend that you check them out. So Bob, thank you so much for your time today, for walking us through the history of you and Kurzweil and how you got into Source Audio, the near retirement in the early 2000s. We're glad you didn't do that. And thanks for inspiring more people to enter into the industry as well. I think that certainly we need more younger people doing this, because, as I said, the guys that I know that actually do DSP, I think I can count on my hands that really know it, and most of the other companies, like me, if I wanted to do it, I'd have to contract to somebody. I don't have those skills. I'm barely competent in analog. So I am appreciative of your skill and thank you for bringing more people in. That was a ton of fun. I really loved talking with Bob. I really loved getting to hear his story about how he started at Kurzweil, the developments that happened there, kind of being really one of the early pioneers of developing some of this digital technology and DSP, and then moving on to Source Audio after having quite a ride over at Kurzweil after 19 years. And just getting to hear about kind of some of the trials and tribulations, and I certainly can relate to a lot of them, having made some serious missteps throughout the course of development of my brand and company, and getting to hear that I wasn't the only one that made bad manufacturing choices or bad aesthetic choices. Or I remember spending one time like $12,000 on product boxes that were way too big and weren't practical to ship anywhere, especially overseas. So there's always these little things that always happen throughout the course of development that you learn the hard way, and hopefully you learn from the mistakes and you're able to survive them. And certainly Source Audio has done a great job at that, and they're one of my absolute favorite pedal companies out there. So I was really grateful to get to talk to Bob about this and get to hear more about his story and how Source Audio became a company. I want to give a huge thank you to everybody that makes this podcast possible: Hunter Harrison, Mason Mejia, and Tim Marco, who are all involved in the back end on the editing, the mixing, the production, and creating the actual soundtrack that scores every single Rig Doctor podcast. Thank you to all of them. And until next time, I'm Mason Marangella, the Rig Doctor. See you later.